Hello, it's Duncan. From your perspective as a viewer of these videos, it's been 3 months since we started work on pricing items. In this fast-paced agile world, that's an awfully long time to ask our sponsors to wait for functionality. It is only 4 hours of video content though. You don't see about half of the source footage. A lot of that is waiting for the combination of IntelliJ, Gradle, compilers, the JVM and JUnit to get around to actually running tests. It's a bit embarrassing, sometimes more than 20 seconds after a minor edit. The rest is removing typos and shortening edits, with some re-saying things that I realise I have stumbled over. So in total, I've probably been typing, waiting and refactoring for 8 hours since August. I'm not going to claim that I could have done all the work in a day, because there are also the blind alleys that I haven't shown. Rehearsing definitely leads to a more direct path than we would have taken had we just sat down and worked. I do think it's less than a week's work though, which isn't bad considering we are integrating with a slightly dodgy external API and have implemented our own fake version in that time. In the end, engineering is about trade-offs. If we had shipped sooner, we could have had quicker feedback about how well the system actually works from a customer's perspective, but would have been less confident that it was actually working, and that when failures do occur, we could diagnose them easily. We'd also been less happy about the internal quality of our code, which would affect our ability to do the next piece of work in this area. In reality, I think that if I shipped this pricing feature with this level of monitoring and quality in a week, I'd be pretty happy. But of course, we haven't actually wired it up yet, so let's stop talking and get on with it. Finally. We've had 2 versions of our app on the go for a little while now. The top one here is what we run in production, and the bottom is what we run when we test. And this is the version where we switched on pricing. So we have the feature flag here that switches on the rendering of the pricing, and our actual pricing service here is talking to our value of client, which is in turn talking to the value of servers. In contrast, our production code is using our base app with all the standard defaults. So that means no op prices and features with pricing set to false. So now we're ready to deploy pricing to production. We can do that by making the defaults the same as our test main. So in other words, we will be using value of, and we'll be using pricing feature, apart from the port, of course, which is different in both cases. Of those, the feature flag is the easiest to do. So let's go to our app and our features and set the default to be true. We'll run our test and see what that does for us. Now our test was set to reflect the production code, so it's not unexpected that something failed with that flag, but let's have a look to see what it is. And it's our list stock test list stock. And it is in fact that we've changed the rendering. We've added in the column for the price, which is blank, because we're not actually putting any prices in. Okay, well, we do want to render the prices, so that's a good start. Let's approve that and run again. So everything now passes. And now we have to decide, are we likely to want to roll that change back? If we are, then it would be nice to be able to just set the feature flag back to pricing false. But I think probably we're just going to go for it. So let's go to features and say, let's remove the option to enable or disable pricing altogether. Take that out and try and recompile. We'll see what that affects. Okay, so in our roots now, is pricing enabled? We're asking features pricing. Well, we now know that that is effectively always true. So it means that we don't need to pass features into here. I'm going to leave this in here as a parameter because it is our way of toggling features, and I don't want to forget how we're doing it, but we can tell IntelliJ to suppress that for just this parameter. Okay, now into the list handler, we know that this pricing enabled is true. So we'll go in here, and that means that we know that it's true here. And if it's true there, then this one we can get rid of, I think. And now down into render. And here we know it's true. Let's have a look where we use that. We use it here in stock list view model, so we can set that to true. That would mean that this was unused. And then in our view model, where we're populating that and then reading it out in a template, let's just see what the effect of our changes so far are on running the tests. Well, we don't get as far as that because we can't compile, because we're still setting the pricing true in our test main here, but now we know we can take that out altogether because that's what's happening in the default app now. Take that out, run the tests. Okay. Now we had two rendering tests. One had the pricing enabled, the other one without the pricing enabled. Now, unsurprisingly, the one where we didn't enable the pricing is now failing because pricing is now enabled anyway. So I think we can probably just delete this test altogether, the one with the pricing enabled. And then the expected output for list stock should have been the expected output for list stock with pricing enabled. So if we go and find those approved files, we should be able to delete both of those and rename this one to be list stock approved. And if we're right, that should cause these to pass. It turns out we're not quite right. Let's find out why. And the answer is because we're now not setting up any prices for that test. That's a bit of pain. Go back here, undo the last change. Rename that one instead. Let's see whether that does it. So this is now the one with the prices. Oh, that's working. That's because this is the version of the test that actually has some prices to be rendered. Keep on seeing this code where we have an item and we're copying it, changing the price. And it always makes things look a little untidy. So I think we're going to add in two functions here. One is item with price. Give it a price, which is nullable, which is going to be this.copy price equals successive price. And we can use that one for these cases. So that will make that a little bit shorter. And likewise here. Check that works. Good. And we can similarly have one with a result of price here. So that will be a result of nullable price or exception, which is what we are using. And that would just be price. We can use that one in here. And then finally, we can change this to be this with price. That's the price. Again, check that runs okay. Good. And now I think we'll take these two and put them, they're useful for testing in the same place as test item, wherever that is. That's here. It's a bunch of useful sort of utilities. And run once more time. Splendid. Looks like there's one little tidy up we could do by inlining that. And maybe that one as well. Good. Now back in our renderer, we should be able to remove this flag altogether, which will mean that we don't need this here. And run one more time. And now it fails because we're not rendering the column at all. I think that must be due to the template. Let's go and have a look. That's this here. And here we have this conditional logic here, this mustache stuff. And no doubt if there's no flag at all, is pricing enabled is resolving to false, as opposed to throwing or anything like that. So we can get rid of that, that, and that, and that. And if we write, everything should now pass. Finally, we'll make quite a few changes there, starting really by removing this flag altogether. That means that we don't have a flag to pass into the list handler. It means that our default list stock includes the pricing. It means that when we actually run up the app, which is what we do in our list stock tests, we will have a column for pricing, but no actual prices there. Our routes now don't use the features, although we'll leave them in there for future expansion. Our rendering doesn't need the pricing enabled flag. We've tidied up our tests. And the mustache template. And finally, our test main has come closer to our plain old main because now we don't have a difference in the features. Okay, that seems like a safe enough place to check in. If we were to push at this point, our user would see a column that wasn't being populated. I think that would be fine. So this is install price rendering. I think we'll commit, but not push right now. Back then to the difference between our main and the test main, which is one where we have installed pricing. You see that we have this retry and this value of client. Now the retries, in fact, we've already put into our production code, because inside app, we use the price stock list loader, and that installs the retry policy here. So we should be able to take that out at least, leaving us just the value of client. Let's write a test that forces this code into production. First of all, I'm going to take this to remember it, and then close this, and we'll go to our integration test, which is our list stock test. In here for now, I'm going to affect the client that we use in the test. So this is going to be pricing. And instead of using value of, we're going to use our local faker value of, but actually over HTTP. So we're going to run that on a local host. On a port of our choice, let's say 8888. So what seems like a long time ago now, we wrote our own fake version of the value of server that we could run up. And if you remember, we ran the same tests against it and the actual value of with these value of contract. So we have quite a bit of confidence that our server works in the same way as theirs does, but that we can control the prices that it returns. In this, the fake value of tests, you see how we start up a server for testing. So let's take this code and put it into our list stock tests. Now we need to give our fake server a pricing strategy, but so far these tests have been run against no pricing at all. So I think if we were to return null in here, all these tests might pass. Well, they pass, so our logic is correct, but obviously we do want to be pricing with something. Let's add a property for our expected price stock list. Duplicate this and call it expected priced stock list. And that will be our stock list copied where the items, it's a list of. And here we want to put in some prices, and we've now got our with price. A couple of prices we'd recognize. This one will be with price null, and this one with price 999. Now we can take this and make it the expected thing that we load here. So not the one with null prices, but actually priced up. And run. Then that fails because our pricing service is always returning null. How do we get it to return the values we want? Well, that's this lambda here. Now previously we've used a map to look up, but in fact we can use a when. So we could say here when the ID is stock list 0 ID, then we want to return that 666. When it's the ID from last one, that wants to be 999. Otherwise, our price is null. But that should be else null. Is that good enough? Let's find out. To run the tests. And we fail again. Let's have a look. This time we're failing because we are now rendering an actual price into our HTML, which is exactly what we want. So we can approve that. Another failure, though, is this test here, where we're updating the stock list. And we need to add a price to these instead of these null prices. Now, these sort of interactions between the way that one system is working and the way that another system is working, our updating and our pricing, are just the sort of thing we probably should be trying to avoid in these tests. I think given that we have good unit tests of our stock loading to show that we do update, we could get rid of this test altogether. I think the same is true of this test here, which is these file updates. Again, that's tested at the stock loading level. It need not be tested at the integration test level. So we can take that out. And if we write now, everything should pass. Hooray! At the moment, this lambda is separated by a whole screen from code up here that has its consequences. So I think it would be good for us to spell that out. We could say this would be our pricing. And if we took our lambda here and put that into pricing, then you'd have the context where you see the stock list and the expected price stock list of those numbers all being the same. And then in here, we can say this is fake value of routes on that pricing, which tidies it up quite nicely. And maybe call that value of pricing to distinguish it from this one. And run. Good. In fact, the symmetry is worth a lot in software. So I think we could probably say this is stock list 0, stock list 1, list 2. And finally up here, we could say stock list 1 to null. And if we've got anything else, that would be an error. And now let's pull this under there where it's a little bit more expected. We have a constant struggle in our tests to try and make them understandable. Sometimes we can do that by removing duplication, but often keeping the duplication and having a pattern that our brain sees, like this one here, is enough to aid comprehension. That's especially true if we can get rid of a lot of the noise. In one of the previous tests, we got rid of this local date parse noise by replacing these to just be local date and instant parse to be t. We can fix those by saying local date parse as local date and instant.parse as t. So that allows this to compile and remove some of the noise from it. Another little bit of noise here, if we had stock list with items, then that could take a var arg and we can get rid of those. And we can make that exist as an extension function, stock list. And this will work if we have var arg items item, and here's this dot copy items equals items to list. And once again, if we make that public, take it out of here, then we can put that in our test data file, along with these. Here, that's unused, and that is unused as well. Have a little look how we're doing. So we now have a nice simple test. And considering that it's actually starting up a server, a reasonably simple test setup. Let's check all those changes were good. Wonderful. And now finally, the reason we were here, which is to move this value of client into our default. We know we're going to have a different URL here between this test and production. So I think we'll say that what we actually want here is value elf URI. That's the thing we want to specify. And that doesn't exist, so we'll add it. And let's move that up just above pricing. Now let's look to see what that's done to our app. Now we have a value of URI, but we'll need to change this to be value of client on the value of URI. And finally, default this to be the actual value of server. Now we don't want this to be a constructor parameter. So we move it into here, make it private. And in fact, we can just inline it into our loader. Try running. And we'll find that our test main now doesn't have to create the pricing itself. It can use this in there. But that is just the default, so it can go all together. Are we right? Well, let's try running it. And click on the link. And here we are back with the prices. And if I refresh, you'll see that works. And finally, we'll just return to our main to discover that IntelliJ has given us a bad value in there. So we can just get rid of that and go with the proper value of version. This is in fact safe to run as well. So we can just run this and look on localhost 80. And that works as well. There aren't too many changes in that commit. Our main itself is unchanged because that is always just starting our default app. But app has changed so that pricing isn't configurable, but the value of URI is. Application events test has changed. Oh, again, IntelliJ has added a parameter. I think that shouldn't be changed, so we'll roll it back. The stock tests. Well, we now start up a server and need to actually have pricing, and we've removed some tests of functionality that was tested by lower level unit tests. The rendered file for that test has changed because we're now actually putting in prices. Stock tests, that seems to be another we should probably roll back. And our test main has changed because the functionality that we were overriding, we were changing from the default, is now back to the default. And finally, test data has a few useful little utilities. I made a little change there, so I'm going to run the tests again. And it looks like we're good to go to production. This is deploy value pricing. And push it. There's one warning that we can get rid of the no-op pricing that we are now not using at all. Just before we go home for the day, it occurs to me that we have quite a bit of duplication between our list stock tests and the price stock list loader tests. I'm not sure the duplication is necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that we have added some utilities that we could use here. So in particular here, we could use our new with price. Here and here. And also then, this is loaded stock list with items. Companion's doing there. Again, we could make these clearer if we used the items from the original stock list. And finally, once again, we could make use of that pattern recognition by putting in another line in here. And we'll run those tests. Wonderful. Well, stop press. I just got back from showing this functionality to the owner of Gilded Rose, and she points out that it's really rather slow. Here's a page refresh. And yes, that is pretty slow, isn't it? I seem to remember that page load being pretty much instant before, so I don't know what's changed. The owner says that she's happy to put up with it, but that making it faster is the most important thing we could be working on next. So I guess we'll be doing that next week. If you'd like to see that episode, then please subscribe to the channel. And if you've enjoyed this, then I think you'll enjoy both the book that I wrote in that price, called Java to Kotlin, a Refactoring Guidebook, and the workshop that we are running in Amsterdam at KotlinConf in 2023. Details of both of those are in the show notes below. Thanks for watching.